Okay, one thing that I want to be very careful about distinguishing between page 802 and page 804. It's important that we understand that these are two different things that are happening. So on page 802, we're talking about methods of collecting data. So that specifically refers to these four things. On page 804, we're specifically talking about sampling methods. So this is collecting data methods. Now we talk specifically about sampling methods. So we're getting more specific on how we collect data. One of the best ways to talk about how to sample and sample well is to start by talking about what you don't want to do. So everything on this page is a dumpster fire. These are bad. You cannot fix the problems that you create when you do these sampling methods. There's no way to fix your data. You can't take a larger sample size. You can't adjust anything. You essentially have to throw out all of the data that you collected and start again. So you want to make sure that these two sampling methods, you never use these sampling methods. So first one is convenience sampling. And it is exactly as it sounds. This is when you choose people. That are easy to reach. So convenience sampling is choosing individuals from the population who are easy to reach. One convenience sample for me at the beginning of this unit, I said, I'm interested in knowing, and our district is interested in knowing, how many students would want to continue distance learning Fridays. A convenient sample would be for me to ask you guys. You're right here. I can just ask you quickly. I don't have to go and find a bunch of kids. But what often happens is that you guys would not be representative of the entire population of Cypress students. So this is another example that helps illustrate how convenience samples often aren't representative. Suppose we want to know how long students at a large high school spent doing homework last week. We might go to the school library. And ask the first 30 students we see about their time spent doing homework. The issue is convenience sampling often produces unrepresentative data. So what do we mean by that? What do we mean by unrepresentative? Choosing students in the library as our sample would lead to what we call bias. Choosing only kids from the library would be biased because students who hang out in the library tend to be, and the most common answer that I get is nerdy. So back in the day when we didn't have cell phones and we didn't have like Nintendo Switches, we didn't have access to computers, if you were in the library, you were there for a reason. Like you were using one of the two computers that we had, or you were getting a reference book or checking out a book or actually working. So back when I was your age, I would think that this sample would probably be, these kids probably study more than the average kid. They're in the library currently studying probably. Nowadays though, and not this year because of COVID, but when I go to the library here, especially before or after school or even during lunch, I don't really see kids doing their homework. I see kids playing. Like playing Magic cards, playing their Nintendo, on their computer, playing a game. So I would think that if you ask those kids, they probably study less than the average student. Either way, it's not going to be a good sample. You want to make sure that you are sampling all grade levels, all types of students. So you don't want to just do this convenient, easy one of choosing students in the library. The other one that is very problematic is a voluntary response sample. And this is the one that is probably the most common. So voluntary response is when people choose themselves. People who choose themselves. By responding to a general invitation. So this is call in, text in, online polls, etc. So if you're a senior and you filled out that Canvas survey on graduation, you participated in a voluntary response sample. You had to choose to fill out the survey. There is an issue with that, though, because people who choose to participate are usually not representative of the population. And the reason why is because voluntary response samples often attract people who feel strongly about an issue. So, I have a couple examples of this. The first one is talking about back in the day again. We used to get our news from magazines and newspapers, and in the newspaper there would always be advice columnists, and you could write in about your relationship or your kids or your job, and these authors would answer your question or give you advice on your problem. I think one of them was called like Dear Judy or something. So parent had written in about their children. They were struggling with their children and trying to correct their behavior. So Dear Judy gives some suggestions to help with this parent's kid, and then at the end invites her readers to answer the question, if you know or if you knew then what you know now, would you have kids again? 72% of the people that mailed in their response said no. That's a lot of people that would not have their kid again. Could you imagine your parent being like, no, I would not have you again? I don't think very many parents feel that way. I think what happened was, if you're satisfied with your kid, you're probably like, geez, what a crazy question, and then you get on with your day. But if you have some little demon kid that's like causing problems all the time, you probably feel so strongly about your decision to have kids that you would take the time to write the letter, get the envelope, put a stamp on it, and take it to the mailbox. Like, you gotta be really motivated to do that. Another example, and this just happened today. So when I go to Starbucks, I order online, and they always give me the option to fill out a survey. And I hardly ever do, because there's not really anything that's going right or going wrong. I'm just like, it was fine. It was a trip to Starbucks. But today, they really messed up my order, Avani. So I am feeling like so strongly about how badly they messed up that I might actually go in. I might actually fill out a survey, take my time to fill out a survey, because good heavens, they got to learn how to do these things right. So voluntary response, you want to keep in mind that if you're going to go out of your way to respond, you probably feel very strongly. The other issue is that you probably share the opinion of whoever is asking you the question. So in the case of my Starbucks drink, that doesn't really apply. But and in the Dear Judy example, that doesn't really apply. But we're gonna see an example about a question that a famous CNN anchor asked, and it is going to be a problem because those viewers that watch this anchor probably share the same opinion as the anchor. That's why they watch them. It's just like if you listen to a podcast or subscribe to a YouTube channel, you probably don't do that if you hate the person. You probably do it because you like them and they're relatable and you think the same way as them on some things. This, feeling strongly or sharing the same opinion, often leads to bias. So hopefully this is kind of bringing it together for you and illustrating that these two methods are bad because they result in bias. And one of the biggest issues, if not the biggest issue with bias, is that you cannot fix it. If your method is bad, there is no way to fix your sample. You literally cannot use it. You have to take a good sample. So a design of a statistical study shows bias if it consistently overestimates or underestimates the value you want to know. So a statistical study is biased if it consistently gives you an estimate that is not close to the true value. Bias can result from bad sampling methods, and that's what this page is on. Bad sampling methods. It is an issue with the way you gathered your data. And unfortunately, convenient samples and voluntary response samples, oh man, that should be the word response, are almost guaranteed to show bias. So if it consistently over or underestimates, you have a problem, and these methods consistently give you estimates that are not good. So then the last thing to talk about today is how you describe this bias. So up here where I say we don't want to take kids from the library because they might study more than the average kid, we have to have a way to describe that so that we can get full credit on our exam. So these are the tips. This is the framework. There's a couple things that I want to highlight because they're very important. On the second part, so first you say why your method is biased. That's step one. On step two, you say if it will include a higher or lower, and what you're usually referring to here is a proportion or a mean. Or sometimes you just say a higher number of. And I give you a few examples of this, so you'll practice this. It'll have a higher number of students who study a lot. And then you have to say because. You have to explain why you think that this sample would have students who study more than an average student because they're in the library, and kids in the library are usually studying. This will lead to an overestimate or an underestimate of the actual amount of time students spend on their homework. So those two little words explain why you think there will be a higher or lower number of XYZ and that it'll over or underestimate the actual value. Okay, that seems like a lot. So hopefully when we do it in the next two examples, it feels more manageable. I have written out most of it for us, so it's number 1 and number 2, just so that you have some really good examples of how you do this. Everything that's bolded in the response is supposed to match what's on these tips right here. So if it's bolded, it's because it's coming from this bottom of page 804. So our first one is about budget cuts at a school. So I don't have kids, but I live in the community that is served by Cypress High School. So me and Man pay taxes that go towards Cypress and are used for Cypress students, even though we don't have kids. That money that we pay, the taxes that we pay, then goes to fund things like athletics, the arts, teacher salary, building maintenance, all types of stuff. So there is a parent of a football player who is concerned about proposed budget cuts to the athletic program. So the board is saying maybe we should take money from sports and give it to like the arts or the after school program. So she asks 60 spectators at the football game if they agree with the cuts. So first of all, it might be helpful to figure out what our population is. If this has to do with the school budget, your population is all stakeholders. Now, what is a stakeholder? A stakeholder is anybody who is affected or contributes to or lives by the school. So I'm a stakeholder, even though I don't have kids that go here. You're definitely a stakeholder because you go to school. It's the community members. It's everybody that pays into the school. It's the administrators. It's the teachers. These are all stakeholders. But this parent is going to ask 60 spectators at an athletic event, at the football game. Well, I don't really know that you're at the football game if you don't have a kid in the game, or a friend in the game, or some pretty good reason to be there. So, do we think that these 60 people represent all stakeholders of the school? Probably not. This method is biased because it is a convenience sample. So first of all, the method is biased because it's a convenience sample. She has a kid on the football team, so it is easy for her to reach out to people at the football game because she's at the football game. This sample will likely include a higher proportion of people who, okay, so if they're at the game, do we think that they are going to agree with the budget cut? No. Liz is saying nope. So this will likely include a higher proportion of people who do not agree. We think these people are going to say, no, I don't agree with the proposed cuts. So that means we will have a higher number of people who do not agree. This will lead, if it's a higher number, this will lead to an overestimate of the actual proportion of people who do not agree. That blank is not really big enough. So this response is actually missing something important. So this method is biased because it will include a higher proportion of people who do not agree with the budget cuts. I did not explain why. Why do we think that this will lead to a higher proportion of people who do not agree? What about this sample tells us these people are probably going to say no? Not that it's a convenience sample. What's the issue with the people in the sample? So I'm going to put a little dot here, like a little star. And I'm going to add in because the spectators obviously support the athletic program. You have to pay to get into these games. And if you pay to get into the game, then you definitely support the athletic program because that money should be going to the football team. So we think most people will not agree because if they're at the game, they must support the athletic program. Now, our next problem actually includes everything. So back on this page, I highlighted the because and the word actual. So I'm going to do that in this response we just wrote. We had to add in the because. The actual was there. In this next problem, the because is there and the actual is there. So this example is the one where you would likely share the opinion of the person asking the question. So, former CNN commentator Lou Dobbs does not like illegal immigration. So, he's against illegal immigration. One of his shows was largely devoted to attacking a proposal to offer driver's licenses to illegal immigrants. So, he's against illegal immigrants and he's aggressively expressing that opinion. During the show, Mr. Lou Dobbs invited his viewers to go to his website, loudobbs.com, to vote on the question, would you be more or less likely to vote for a presidential candidate who supports giving driver's licenses to illegal aliens? So, first of all, you would have to be watching his show if you are able to answer this question. Second of all, this guy kind of sounds like a jerk. So if you're watching his show, it's probably because you don't think that he's a jerk. Like, I don't think that I would be watching Lou Dobbs because I'm reading this thinking, oh, geez, you're kind of a jerk. So I wouldn't want to watch. If you're watching, it's probably because you read this and you're like, yeah, we shouldn't be giving driver's licenses to illegal immigrants. So do we think that if they're watching the show and they're choosing to go to the website, do we think they're going to be less likely to vote for this presidential candidate or more likely to vote for this presidential candidate? So this presidential candidate supports giving driver's licenses to illegal immigrants, and we're against it. So these people are probably going to be less likely. And that's what we end up seeing. 97% of the over 7,000 people that responded said that they would be less likely to vote for this president just because they support giving driver's licenses to illegal immigrants. And that shouldn't be surprising because we know these people likely agree with Lou Dobbs and we know that they probably feel strongly. So here's the issues. The population should be all registered voters. The population should be all people eligible to vote. So all registered voters. If we want to know the proportion of people who would be less likely to vote for this candidate, we really want to be asking all registered voters. But instead, we get 7,350 viewers of Lou Dobbs that chose to answer. So this method is definitely biased, and it's biased because it's a voluntary response sample. It will likely include a higher proportion of people who are less likely to vote for this candidate. So when I determine if it will have a higher or lower number, I think about how would these people respond. So here, these people would not agree. So I say it's a higher number of people who would not agree. I think these people are going to respond that they're less likely to vote for this person. So I say it's a higher number of people less likely to vote. The reason why is because viewers that would choose to visit Lou Dobbs' website probably share his opinion and feel strongly about this issue. If this is higher, this means this will lead to an overestimate of the actual proportion of people who are less likely to vote for a presidential candidate who supports giving driver's licenses to illegal aliens. That should be illegal immigrants. So we have some very bad sampling methods. And the worst part about these methods is that you can't fix the bias that results. You cannot use these samples if you truly want to estimate a value. How do we describe the bias that results? We have this framework down here. So your task between now and next class period is to do the 3 check for understanding questions. And then you will watch the video for the good sampling methods. If you look at the good sampling methods, page 807 and 808, there's actually very little that you need to write down. So I'm hoping that that video goes very fast for you guys. Do we understand what we're doing? Okay.